Okay, on behalf of the League of Women Voters of the Cooperstown and Oneonta areas, welcome to our first ever virtual candidates debate, which is for the Democratic primary election for the New York State 121st Assembly District. My name is Leanne Hirabayashi, and I will be your moderator tonight. Joining me in running tonight's debate are League members Steve Laundner to keep track of time, Julie Sorensen to gather and organize email questions from the audience, and Erica Scott to manage our audio settings. So let me review a few logistics with you. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick. All right. So for those of you in our audience, if you wish to ask questions, please email them to lwvcoop@gmail.com. Please include your name, the town you're from, and to which candidate you are addressing your question. If it's both candidates, just write both, or we'll assume that it is for both. Again, that's lwvcoop@gmail.com. For those of you in the audience who are familiar with the Zoom platform, we have intentionally removed a number of features. Chat, Q&A, audience, video, and audio are all not available. Finally, this debate is being recorded and will be posted at the Oneonta League's website, which is lwvoneonta.org, and we plan to do that by the end of the week. So in addition to our candidates, we are joined on the panel by Daily Star Manager Robert Cairns. And so let me just explain a little bit about the League. This meeting has been planned and is conducted by the two League of Women Voters organizations in Otsego County, representing the Oneonta and Cooperstown areas. This year marks 100 years that the League has empowered voters and defended democracy. Over the last century, we fought for election protection and equal access to the ballot, all while maintaining our commitment to nonpartisanship and fostering an informed electorate. Yes, the League is a nonpartisan political organization, which is a combination that can be confusing. We are nonpartisan in that we do not support or oppose political parties or candidates. And we are political in that we believe democracy is not a spectator sport and that all citizens need to educate themselves and participate in our democracy. We're not engaged in organizing and hosting candidates' nights. League members study issues and policies, come to member agreement, and then we advocate based on those decisions. We've retained the name League of Women Voters because of our suffragist roots, but for well over 50 years, men have been included in our membership. The Oneonta Area League was founded in 1965, followed by the Cooperstown Area League in 1972. And we're proud to say that we are one of the few, if not only, counties in upstate New York with two leagues. Over the years, the two leagues have had a local impact on issues ranging from recycling to voting machine selection to the county administrative position and much more. We hope you will consider joining us. And if you're interested in joining either league, please contact us that's lwvcoop@gmail.com and lwvoneonta@gmail.com. Before we begin the debate, there are two important messages that the League would like to impart. So I'm going to share my screen again briefly. So first, complete the 2020 census. The census data will be used for the next decade to make funding decisions that affect our schools, our communities, our infrastructure, our businesses, and our families. We want to get our fair share, and we need every person to be counted. It's really easy. Go online to 2020census.gov or call 844-330-2020. Next, and this really our second big thing is to vote. You're here for the debate, so we know you're engaged. Here are the important dates to keep in mind. Early voting, it starts in 4 days. It continues until 2 days before the election on the 21st. Check your County Board of Elections for times and places. And we also recommend that the League of Women Voters of New York, that's lwvny.org. They list all the county board of election hours and locations. June 16, that's the last day. That's a week from today, and it's the last day to postmark a mailed-in application for an absentee ballot. June 22, that's the day before the election. If you want to apply in person for an absentee ballot, this is your last day to do so. And for those who are mailing in their absentee ballot, this is the last day to mail your ballot in. On June 23rd, that is the election day. It is when polls open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. And it is the last day to deliver your absentee ballot in person. So again, for more information, we recommend going to vote411.org and lwvny.org. Now let's get on to the debate. Okay, so tonight we have with us the two candidates for the Democratic primary election of the New York State 121st Assembly District. I'm going to just explain a little bit about that to you. So the New York State Assembly, as described in Ballotpedia, the New York State Assembly is the lower chamber of the New York State Legislature, which, along with the New York State Senate, works with the governor of New York to create laws and establish a state budget. Legislative authority and responsibility of the New York State Assembly include passing bills on public policy matters, setting levels for state spending, raising and lowering taxes, and voting to uphold or override gubernatorial vetoes. There are 150 seats in the New York State Assembly, and each assembly member represents an average of 129,187 people. Assembly members serve two-year terms and are not subject to term limits. And to be eligible to serve in the New York State Legislature, members must be New York State residents for 5 years and district residents for 12 months. The 121st Assembly District includes Madison County and parts of Otsego and Oneonta counties. All right, the candidates in alphabetical order by last name are Dan Buttermann, hi Dan, and Corey Mosher. So the ground rules for this evening have been reviewed in advance by our candidates. Each candidate will have 4 minutes for an opening statement, and the order of that was determined by a draw. Candidates may choose not to use all 4 minutes. The timekeeper will hold up a sign on the screen when 1 minute, and Steve, if you could show that, 1 minute, so you'll want to keep an eye on that screen. So 1 minute, 30 seconds, and 15 seconds remain, and then a stop sign when time is up. There's 30, there's 15, and there's the stop sign. So after opening statements have been made, questions for the candidates will be taken from the audience. And at the end of the question period, candidates will be able to make a brief 2-minute closing statement. Again, candidates may choose not to use all 2 minutes. And we are scheduled to conclude at 8:30 p.m. So now we're ready for opening statements, and I'd like to start off with an opening statement from Dan Buttermann.
Good evening. I'd like to start by saying thanks to the League of Women Voters for putting this event together. It's a tall order putting it online, and I'm glad that they were able to put it through. I also want to say thanks to my primary opponent for agreeing to participate. Through tonight's discussion and the questions, I plan to present myself as the best candidate to represent the Democratic Party in November, and then later the best candidate to represent all of us come January in Albany. So the question is, why am I running? Well, plainly speaking, I am running for my family. I am running for the future of New York. When I look at my 3 girls and I think about the future before them, I'm just like you. I'm frustrated that there are opportunities out there, but we're not some big ideas on education reform, on incentivizing new business and job development, climate change, and renewable energy. And I do want to talk about those important things. But like you, I'm also very worried right now. I'm worried about our safety and our health. With the pandemic that came out of nowhere at the beginning of this year, things have changed. And as we say, there is a new normal. So the questions that we want to discuss as well are addressed at how can we ensure our safety and our health as we emerge from this pandemic? Where do you go if you're sick and you need treatment? And then how can we pay for it? And for those businesses that were shut down for months to help protect us all, now it's on us to help protect them so that they can reopen and bring all of their employees back and get right back on track. And to do that, we need our government to support the process. And therefore, we need someone in Albany that can get our fair share. Right now, we don't have it. We put in our fair share, but we're not getting it back. The incumbent, John Salka, has said in his own words, I do not expect to get significant legislation passed. That's a troubling statement.
We're having a little trouble with Dan's video. And,
it speaks to me a lack of vision and an excitement for the opportunities. Did I cut out?
Yeah.
I'll back up. Can you hear me now?
You're good.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll just pick up then. Not knowing where I cut off, we'll just jump right in. Talking about our fair share from Albany, and that we are putting it in, but we're not getting it back. And we need a representative that is able to get our fair share. And I think we need a candidate with vision and an excitement for the opportunities ahead of us. Now, when the incumbent, John Salka, said, I do not expect to pass significant legislation, I think he was speaking to the issue of not having a vision for the future. But I know when he said it, I think he was more thinking about his position in the minority in the assembly. It's a truth we don't necessarily want to bring forward, but we need to talk about it. When I get to the assembly as your representative, I will be able to get that fair share. I'll have a stronger position to work for you, and I will do what I can to bring home our fair share. And the thing is, we also need to have every support opportunity we can get, and that comes from the New York State Speaker of the Assembly, Carl Hastie. And to that end, I've already got his phone number in my phone ready to go, and I plan to use it. I'm going to call him day one and get right to work. Before I end, I want to talk about the demonstrations throughout our district, the state, in New York. I'd be wrong if I didn't address it. These demonstrations demanding justice and equality. I've been at them, and I will continue to be there. Things must change, and I will be there to listen and to respond. With that, now let's get to the questions.
Thank you. Thank you, candidate Buttermann. And now the opening statement from Corey Mosher.
Hello, thank you for having me, and I would like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this event and for giving voters the opportunity to learn the differences between their choices. First, I feel it vital to talk about what has gripped the nation over the last few weeks. We will not and cannot be silent. We will listen, and we will let the voices and perspectives of the disenfranchised Black men and women of this country guide us and push us to the change we so desperately need. This district deserves proper representation, and right now, it isn't getting it. In my run for office, I aim to be clear and transparent. I'm here to tell you exactly what I'm going to do. My campaign has three main pillars. 1, move the ball forward as we address climate change. 2, represent agriculture issues and provide solutions to the problems our farmers face. And 3, reinvest in our infrastructure. We're going to work hard to address climate change by modernizing our community with 21st century clean technology. I will work with my colleagues to find evidence-based solutions and will remain active and open to achieve buy-in from our local communities. I will invest in our infrastructure by making broadband a utility and by increasing support for educators and education institutions. This community is one that I love and is one that I know deserves more respect. We need to make this a place that people want to settle by giving them options to make a comfortable living. Finally, I will lead on the issue of agriculture by educating my colleagues in the legislature on what it is to live and work in a rural community based on my own experience as a farmer. I know our legislature is willing to listen, but right now there is a vacuum, and I will be that person that fills that vacuum. These issues obviously do not represent a comprehensive look at all that I wish to accomplish, but I believe they provide a snapshot of the kind of leader that I will be. I'm the right choice for the 121st because I'm capable of making the legislature pay attention to our needs. I have been endorsed by Bill McGee because he sees that quality in me and knows that I will be a strong, independent voice for our community. I've been endorsed by Rachel May because she recognizes my hard work and values and knows that I can work with anyone and everyone. Just recently, I've been endorsed by True Blue New York, a progressive coalition dedicated to fighting inequality and Planned Parenthood. All of the people and organizations that have endorsed me have done so because they recognize that I am a voice that will be heard. My connections in Albany and DC already rely on me for perspective on agriculture. When I am in the legislature, I won't just be a resource, I will be a leader. The issues of this community will not be relegated to the back burner. I believe in the people of the 121st, and it's been a while since we've been shown the respect we deserve. We are a vital part of New York State, both in economy and culture. We are more than the artificial divide between upstate and downstate that John Salka tries to play for political points. When legislatures and community leaders look for advice on agriculture policy, they don't go to John Salka and they don't go to Dan Buttermann, they go to me. They do that because they know I'm not in this with an agenda. I'm in it for farmers and for my community. They know that I will see the nuance and be able to connect with folks from all across the aisle. They know that this isn't about my ego. They know that this is about what is right. I am a voice that will be heard because I'm already a voice that is being heard. Allow me to bring my talents to Albany for you. Allow me to work for us and to bring this community what it deserves. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Candidate Mosher. Now we'll move to the questions from the audience and our media representative. As stated earlier, for those of you in the audience, if you have not done so already, please email lwvcoop@gmail.com to send in your questions for the candidates. Candidates will be limited to answers not to exceed 2 minutes, and candidates may decline to answer a question if they choose. Candidates wishing to answer questions not addressed to them may signal the moderator and gain the floor for no longer than 2 minutes. So if a question wishes to follow up after that, they may do so for a minute at the discretion of the moderator. Only questions pertaining to the issues will be allowed, and although controversy and differing opinions are welcome, no personal or abusive questions or comments are permitted. These individuals have put themselves before the public by running for office, and that alone is a service that must be respected. The email questions are being reviewed and collated, so it's possible your question may be slightly reworded if it is similar to someone else's. We are focusing laser-like on asking questions of the candidates, so if you send a statement without a question, we will not read it. Should you wish to express your opinion on a subject with one of the candidates, we ask that you do so by contacting them directly. We will get to as many questions as possible as time allows. So the order for the response to the first question was determined by a draw with Corey Mosher going first. So I will begin with a question from the audience. So let's see, this is from Catherine Paranya, resident of Oneonta, New York. This is a question for both candidates. So we're starting with Corey. Please talk about climate change and your efforts to address this as it relates to Oneonta and upstate New York.
Thank you, Catherine. I stated in my opening statement, climate change is one of the 3 pillars that I really am focused on. Because I see so much opportunity, we've seen it in agriculture with different opportunities that lie there for farmers. But also with that, I understand the importance of local buy-in. And as we move forward with all that the legislature did to move us in the right direction, There's a lot to be done at the local level with our landowners to ensure that this is successful. On our own farm, we have windmills, and I know how that project came into fruition and how it was successful, and also how projects didn't even get off the ground because you didn't have local buy-in. So we need to move in this direction. There's a lot in agriculture that we're doing, whether it be cover cropping or reduced tillage, that are really, really good avenues as we look to not only combat climate change, but also have avenues for farmers to be successful. Thank you.
Candidate Buttermann, do you have a response? You have something you'd like to say as well? Okay.
Unmuted. Yes. It's an excellent question because it's an important topic. And I think the question speaks to how you've
You have frozen again, Dan. Just a second.
prepared to understand the issue at hand. Corey said it's in agriculture as well. So a couple years ago, I took the initiative to partake in a 3-day seminar to learn more about the issue and get my hands on the knowledge so that I can speak intelligently about the issue and go after the things that I think will help us. The legislature started this in 2019 with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act to get us to 85% reductions by 2050. I think we could even get to 100%. And that started the movement that we need to continue to work on. It's not done. We have to work on it. So the follow-up legislation needs to be about the project-based solutions to make that bill work. The wind and solar benchmarks that are embedded within that bill are things that we can do in our district because it's good for the environment, it's good for energy, and it's also a job creator too. There's also storage capacity in that, and this is about the energy generation part, but there's also sustainability initiatives in construction. And so if we can do two things at once, we can fight the climate crisis together by going after energy generation and also energy consumption, bringing that down. We have a bright future in energy, and I'm looking forward to working on that in the Assembly.
Do you, now I think we'll take a question from Bob Cairns, our media representative.
Thank you, Leanne. Welcome, candidates. It's good to speak with you tonight. Let's stay with the same topic for a moment. And I think Mr. Mosher touched on something important. I guess it's Mr. Buttermann's turn to go first, so we'll start there, but I want you both to answer. Buy-in, local buy-in on green energy projects has been a huge problem. People fight against windmills, they fight against solar panels because they don't want to look at them. How do you overcome that?
It's a good question because we're a home rule state and we need to have our communities buy into these projects. It's a transformational opportunity. And so to get buy-in, I think I'd like to draw on my experience on the planning board where I worked for 2 years in the town of Oneonta. And the planning process is often overlooked because there are some significant hurdles that can be addressed through the planning process. Neighborhood plans, those sometimes get set aside in the discussion of these projects, but by empowering our towns and our districts to have planning boards, comprehensive plans, then they are a part of the solution as opposed to Albany pushing the solution to them. So when elected to the Assembly, that is an area where I would focus on empowering our towns and municipalities to get those comprehensive plans, to work in the planning process. Those are the local leaders and expertise that we need to be on this team to bring forward this change.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, the dreaded NIMBA, right? Not in my backyard. So it's so important to have that local buy-in as we've been talking about, and that really, we have to be in this for those people that this would most greatly affect, right? You're not going to get support for a large infrastructure project if you don't have that local buy-in. And the people that are doing this, that are taking these opportunities, it's farmers get approached about solar panel arrays or windmill projects. There's several different examples over the past where they have been, taken advantage of. So we need to have those structures in place to help not only just those local residents where it's going to affect, but also make sure that these projects can be successful over the long haul. And that communication right from the beginning, because then you get to build that trust with these different projects. And trust is anything as you try to confront the challenges of this of climate change.
Thank you. We have another question from our audience. Helen Beal, and I'm not sure, I guess she did not indicate where she's from. Her question is for both candidates, so we'll start with Corey. Why are you a better candidate than your primary opponent?
Thank you, Helen. And I want to say first and foremost, Dan is a very, very nice guy, and this is a little bit tough because I do think very highly of him, and I think he's a good community leader. But it does come down to our experiences and our networks, I think, as is best to represent of why day one I'm going to hit the ground running. Building relationships with people like the state ag commissioner, having those contacts that I have, having been working with Rachel May and all the different relationships I was able to establish doing that is really, really vital, because we need that voice for our district. And it needs to be that communication back and forth. I just got done talking about trust. I've been working on that trust for a long time through the State Veg Association, through my chairmanship of Cooperative Extension. And that's why I think I'm a better candidate day one going.
Dan?
Well, obviously, I don't agree. I'm not here to bash on Corey. Like you said at the beginning, you put yourself out there. It's a respectable thing to do. I want to talk about what I bring to the table. And like we've discussed tonight with experiences and ideas, that is what I bring. A deep background of engagement with my community. Like I mentioned, with the town planning board, the community agency, and what I've talked about in the past, organizing and starting TEDx Oneonta to say, I don't always have the ideas, but I can bring the platform for others that have big ideas so that they can be heard too. And I think this work over many years in the community is starting to show in the campaign process and with the endorsements that I've announced. So as my opponent has mentioned with the endorsements he has, I've announced quite a few endorsements in the last few days, from current mayors to former mayors to educators to healthcare workers. There are a lot of issues facing our district, and I've already gained the confidence and trust from many people in different fields that need a partner in Albany. And I think I've shown that I'd be able to create those trusting relationships that I can draw upon once elected.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. I have, actually, let me ask a question of my own. If elected to the Assembly, what policies would you propose in response to the police brutality experienced by communities of color and the protests that it has sparked? And we'll start with Dan.
I think this is this is an important topic that does need legislative action. This was started last year with the Bail Reform Act, because disproportionately people of color are put in prisons and denied the presumption of innocence, and that has to stop. So it was already started, and I want to continue some of that work. Our incumbent has called for a complete repeal of this legislation while offering no alternative. And so that's wrong. This is plain and simple wrong. So when elected, I want to work on things that, like the bail reform, and take it a step further so that our justice system does not make you buy a presumption of innocence, that you have that until you go to trial and you get your fair, your day in court. And before you get to court, though, as far as relationships with the community that the police have, there's been discussion as far as how we should reimagine the police interaction with our communities. And that is an excellent conversation that we must have. And I want to be a part of it. I'm proud to see that our city council in Oneonta has already started that process to look at the policies and procedures for our city police to rethink how they engage with our community. And so as those processes unfold, then we start to see how legislation can be crafted to support them and ensure that there's equality.
Thank you. Corey?
Thanks, Leanne. So what great leadership the state has already shown this week. As you might be aware, the legislature passed and is working on bills that they passed yet last year. That the first one, the unanimous, or nearly unanimous, although I think there were 3 Republicans that said no on the choking ban. But 50A, I think, Leanne, is where my head goes at first. The community and we really deserve the right to understand what has happened in the past with our police. I think with what happened with George Floyd, is very evident that that police officer, had a record and should not have been in that position. And so getting that passed, I think it has a very good chance to pass this week. But that is vital. I'll add one more thing to this, that a narrative that I don't think has been talked a whole lot. A lot of police that I've seen have shielded them with resisting arrest. And I think that needs to be looked at. And I don't think that's a commentary that's being talked about, because they can shield themselves a lot with, well, he was resisting arrest. Well, resisting arrest, and we end up getting the results that we have. So that's another look that I would want to take a look at, and if there's anything legislative we could do in that process.
All right, we have a question from Deborah Zahn of Hamilton, New York. This question is for both candidates. How would you shape state policy to address division among your constituents? And that question starts with Corey.
Thank you, Debbie. As been talked about, I'm a 4th-generation farmer, but I also, my dad was in the military. We moved up across the country, and I've also spent time volunteering in inner city Baltimore, a community much different from our own. And with that experiences and my work throughout the state, it starts with empathy for people that have backgrounds different from yourself. And when you have empathy and you understand deeply that people come from different circumstances and have different backgrounds, only then can you start to communicate with them and build that trust that I've been talking about. True, really good leadership starts with building trust. And right now, that upstate downstate divide that has been so fomented by John Salka has really inhibited, I think, what we can do in this district. And we need to get back to that. We need to talk about what is good about our district and what we offer with this district. And that needs to be communicated with our colleagues downstate.
Dan?
The question reminds me of an experience I had a few years ago on one of the boards I serve on, and there was a contentious decision that was re-examined when I joined the board. It was made before I got there, but then it came back. And so I had to make a decision now as a member of the board that was not going to be well received by some of the people in the audience. I made the decision I thought was the best considering the circumstances, but afterwards I went right up to the people that were opposing that decision or would have opposed my vote to talk to them more about the background of why they felt the way that they did. And it was a very interesting experience to me because I learned a lot from their perspective. And I talked to my dad after that about what I learned from that moment. And he said, the best thing you can do as an elected official and to serving others is to talk to those people that disagree with you. And since that moment, I've sort of crystallized for me to talk to the people that would otherwise disagree with you, because you're certainly going to learn something from the conversation. And that has been the case since then. And as far as getting the divisions that have been created across this district, this is something that takes a long time to heal. There's a book I read a few years ago called Slow Democracy. You don't bring the solution forward first, you find ways to build trust among them. and then you can find solutions together to the problems that you have. And so when I look at this position as your member of the assembly, I look at this as a slow approach to heal some of these divisions. It'll take time, but we can do it. We just need to bring people together. And knowing that when we disagree, we can disagree in a respectful way, that would be a significant step forward in the right way.
Thank you, Dan. Bob, do you have a question for our candidates?
Yeah, I'd like again to stay with the topic we were just on. You talk about talking with people who disagree with you. As a Democrat running in this district, I think you will have plenty of opportunity to do that. I think some of the things that you criticize Mr. Salka for play pretty well in this district, and that's why he does them. How do you talk to people who don't like bail reform, who don't like driver's licenses for undocumented workers, who don't like some of the other some of the other initiatives that have come out of the state government, and particularly the state assembly, which is viewed as liberal here?
Dan?
Okay, I want to take, it's me, right? Or is it? Yes, sir. Yeah, so I want to take that in two parts. A few years ago, in preparation for this run, I joined the Farm Bureau, and I wanted to learn. And so I went to some Farm Bureau meetings, and I went to the first meeting was a policy discussion meeting. And there was disagreements on almost every policy that was being discussed. But the best part about it afterwards is that all these people in the room, although they disagreed on these particular issues, it didn't create a wound. And after that policy discussion, they were the first ones to go have coffee and talk about everything else. It showed me that it can be done, that you can have disagreements and unpack complex issues without hurting relationships. And so that's an example to me, a positive one to work from. And so the second part of it deals with how do you deal with some of those issues where the incumbent is fine creating the division and fine labeling things for what they are not. And we need to have conversations that ask and get to their root concern with the issue.
We've got a bit of a pause
I've had many
there.
of these conversations about, am I back? Okay. And asking questions and talking to a person about what it is that bothers them about a particular bill, and then hearing them out. I have learned that when you listen, others will listen back too. And it's a wonderful conversation. It's not hard to do once you get used to it. That's what I said before. It's a slow process that we have to engage in. And so on each of those issues, you follow the same process. You work on building trust, you listen to the other side, the opposing views, and you try to deconstruct all of the issues within the larger problem, and then you can start to work to solve each one at a time.
Thank you. Corey?
Yeah, thank you, Bob. You're exactly right. Why not foment and dissent and really galvanize what has plagued our nation as a whole, right? And why not lean into that? Because again, you're going to score political points. Listen, in agriculture, I'm talking with people every day that don't see things eye to eye. And when I talk to them about this and we have those conversations, okay, let's if we're going to separate downstate and upstate, and we're going to be so different, let's upstate, or let's separate the north part of Madison County with the south part of Madison County, or let's separate Cooperstown and Oneonta off of the rest of Otsego. So listen, we need to understand those differences, and it is a challenge, and we don't shy away from having those conversations. But man, that's what makes us great. We're better for those differences in our different backgrounds. And I know how to speak to that in agriculture and grounded in that, and why I think we have seen success in this district for years and years and years is because in agriculture I know how to speak to that language. You're exactly right. It's tough. I have lots of people that I talk to that, Corey, I would help you out in a pinch. I would even take a vote for you, but Democrat, I don't know if I can vote for you. And when we speak to that, and they're joking about that because they know at the end of the day, it's not about my ego, and our conversations get to that point where I don't shy away and talk out of both sides of my mouth. But I do find in engaging in that conversation, there is a whole lot that we agree on. And it's those connection points that when you find them, then you can actually implement them and get real work done.
Great, thank you. Let's take a question from our audience. This is from Charlie Naif, who I'm not sure what town he's from. His question is for both candidates, so we're going to start with Corey. The 121st New York District is a predominantly rural district, and based on party enrollment, it should be a Republican district. However, Bill McGee was elected as a Democrat on his third try and reelected for many terms. How does each candidate propose to replicate Bill McGee's success? So we'll start with Corey.
Yeah, for almost three decades, right? Bill was a leader in this district, and I'll tell a story about Bill, who many people might know. Going to visit Bill, you knew he was for agriculture, and a lot of the times I was talking with Bill about agriculture. But man, one thing that came across with Bill is he was such a good listener. He would let you engage in that conversation and tell what you needed to get across, and he was going to listen, and then he was going to implement after he gave you, right? Sometimes it was a hard meeting. You would go and talk to downstate representatives about agriculture, and you'd be challenged with the back and forth, wondering whether they really understood the intricacies of what you were talking about. And then you'd go into Bill's office and think, okay, this is going to be easy. He gets everything. Oh, but then it wasn't too much of a back and forth because he was taking it all in. And that's so important. And I think that's why Bill was so successful so long, because he was that listener, and he wanted to represent everybody. He didn't want to just represent those that voted for him. He wanted to represent everybody. He wanted to represent this.
Dan?
I think that's a good example of talking about Bill McGee's success. And there's other points of success too. And when I look at some of the election results in the past, one thing that is interesting to me that stands out is that this district has always voted for the presidential winner, George Bush, Barack Obama, and now Donald Trump, which to me, that says that this district pays attention to its candidates, and it votes for the person that they think represents them. Another case in point, in Madison County, the previous sheriff, Al Riley, was a Democrat. And I think that shows us that we will vote for the person that we think represents us. There might be a few that cannot get away from their party, but most can, because if they vote for the person that they can trust, that they believe can be their partner, then they will extend their confidence and give them the vote. And I think in order to do that, there's no secret sauce to this. You have to put in the work, you got to pound the pavement, and get to know as many people throughout the district as you can. And that, I think, can be the way that you win this district back from the Republican side.
Thank you, Dan. Another question from our audience. This is from Tom Olin of Waterville, New York. I want to apologize in advance for butchering anybody's names, by the way. This question is for both candidates. Both candidates list broadband access as an essential need and right. How does each candidate propose, both technically and legislatively, to achieve 100% broadband access throughout this district and the state? So we'll start with Dan.
It's an
I
excellent
think you're
question.
frozen. Okay.
In this day and age, not having broadband and cell coverage is like building a house without a road to connect it. It doesn't make any sense anymore, and I think it is representatives to make it happen. And so I want to point to a case study, if you will, on this with the Otsego Electric Cooperative in Otsego County. They are building a fiber optic network across their membership and beyond, and they started this process a few years ago. This is the example that I would look to as your assembly member to help those kinds of projects. And why it's important is because there has to be money for it. It is not possible for us to make this happen without grant funding from the federal and the state government. And as your representative, I will go after that funding to help our cooperatives and our utilities expand this operation. They will do the work, and we back them up with the money that it takes to get it done. That Siegel Electric plant took almost $20 million to build out. That's not possible for each one of those members to make it happen. It is critical for the state to help with the funding mechanism to make it work. And if elected, that's exactly what I'll go after, is to help the financial support of these projects so we can get to the 100% coverage.
Corey?
Thank you. Great question. And it's not just semantics, it needs to be utility. We electrified this nation at the turn of the last century, and we really need to make this, and I'll tell you why it's so vital, and vital to this district, and why I'm so amped up and want to make this a reality in this district. As the governor talks about education and the revamping of education, we need to leverage that and talk about, hey, our district cannot be left behind by not our kids and our businesses not having access to broadband. This is a necessity for us to be successful. And it is very, very important that we leverage that with our downstate representatives to make sure that this is not overlooked and that we do this going forward. It has to be, there's really good examples in Madison County of a private-public relationship, as they've looked to really understand first what the limitations are and where the gaps are, and then attack that and get to that place. But it can't fall short. We have to define this as a utility, and we cannot stop until everybody has access to broadband. And I think this can be a very good driving economic force for this district. I think we need to be leaders in this, as we represent 5 educational institutions in this district. How many of those students are we retaining, and would we retain those students as remote work and as we go through this crisis has really shown that the access to broadband is so important. We have to be focused in on it, and it will be a priority day one elected office.
Thank you. Okay, another question. This is from Patty McLeish of Cooperstown, New York. This is for both candidates. So we'll be starting with Corey. 1, would you support permanent vote by mail for New York State? And actually I think I'm just gonna go with the 1 question. She has 3 questions, but we'll start with 1. So would you support permanent vote by mail for New York State? And we'll start with Corey.
I would. I think the election reforms, I was so proud to be part of Rachel May's staff, and that was one of her driving forces in getting elected to the Senate was election reform. And man, they did it in the first week of session last year, and it was really great. But we cannot stop. There are really good indicators about absentee ballot and the opportunities, and I think we're going to have higher turnout for this primary than we have in the past, and I think it's going to blow the number out of the water. Access to voting is critical. It's a fabric of our democracy. So yes, I do not believe in the fear mongering. I think it allows people access to vote, and I am a champion that cause.
Thank you. Dan?
To make mail-in voting permanent is a good solution, but not in lieu of polling. So as a complement to it, yes, so that everyone has the opportunity to vote by absentee ballot going forward, I would certainly support that initiative and that legislation. This speaks, though, to an issue that we're seeing right now with the absentee ballots, with the school budget votes, and with the primary ballot. This is an example where we need to think about this ahead of time so that we can plan for it accordingly. This budget cycle for the schools is going to cost almost $20,000 for the schools to vote by mail only. And right now, it's still on the schools' backs to make that happen. So that's a $20,000 cost. So I don't want to do away with it, but when elected to the assembly, I'm going to make sure that we have the funding support to make it happen. It's not, we can't call it good by allowing it and requiring our local municipalities, our school districts, and our Board of Elections to then carry the burden. We have to give them the support to make it work. And that, if elected, is something I would certainly go after.
Thank you, Dan. Bob, do you have a question for our candidates?
Let's stay with what Dan was just talking about. Unfunded mandates. The counties complain about them all the time. School districts, cities, towns, villages. The state requires things of municipalities and schools, but as Mr. Buttermann just noted, doesn't fund them. What do we do about that? Complaints seem to be falling on deaf ears so far.
We start with Dan, right? Yes.
Yep. So how do we get it? And I'll use this school example to continue with that part. When we almost don't propose the budget, it strangles our opportunity to build budgets that are unique to the needs of the communities that we serve. And so the schools are a way to show it where it is a problem, where it is not a sustainable system. So with the school budget this year, they are retracting some of the funding. But at the same time, our costs are going up for healthcare and pension, more so than what we can even collect on new taxes with the 2% tax cap. This is not an equation of sustainability. We have to have clear articulation to Albany that when you deal with upstate communities, it's different than dealing with communities, more urban communities. And I brought this forward before as far as our reliance on state aid. The governor has talked about a 20% retraction as a possibility for school budgets. But across the board, that is devastating to upstate schools. And we need to make sure that we are heard in that way in Albany. The 20% could be as much as 10% operating reduction for our schools, which means teachers lose jobs and kids go without the resources they need. And that is because we have a higher reliance on it. So we can't think about fairness as saying 20% across the board. We need to be able to compromise and find ways that balance the budget locally without pushing that burden to school districts and local municipalities. With 15 seconds, I can't give you the full solution, but of course we talk about it more tonight.
Corey?
No, thank you, Bob. So obviously we're talking austerity a lot these days. And Dan mentioned it. I think there are avenues for revenue, and we need to be looking in the future on how we do that. Man, talking to local leaders and local mayors and county representatives, they're you know, I want to use a word right here. They're mad. They're angry. They don't feel like their voice is heard, and they feel like they constantly get that burden pushed on to those local municipalities. And I really do equate that to not understanding upstate communities and the value that upstate communities have. You can't consolidate everything. You can't just move and save money by okay, then try to figure out a way to make it work. And that's a communication problem. It's a communication problem on the value of our local municipalities and what that funding does for our local municipalities. Too much has been talked about, you know, from the downstate thinking of just the drain that it is financially for our upstate communities. There's a lot of mouths in New York that get fed by upstate growers. There's a lot of things that happen upstate that help benefit New York City. So we need to talk about those and champion what our district provides to that equation. Make sure that we're ensuring the financial stability of our upstate community.
Thank you. Okay, let's take another question from our audience. This is from Steve Lonner, our timekeeper actually, of Oneonta. His question is for both candidates. New York State will be working to recover economically from our ongoing COVID pause for years to come. What will be your priorities to have the state help our district? And we will.
So first and foremost, it means getting back to work safely. Because I don't have to tell anybody viewing tonight how detrimental it would be if we have a second wave of this and we return to anything that looks like we just can't afford that. So we have to do this safely. But my faith in people in this district and in this country, because I think any advances we've made, you know, the numbers that they were coming out with initially as we went into this, how bad it was going to be, man, we stepped up. Our citizens stepped up. We answered that call, and now as we safely get back to work, and it's gonna be a long process. The economic impact on our towns is huge. The colleges that we have in this district, that economic is going to be huge. So it's going to take really thoughtful work and working together to make sure that we understand that those businesses need support and our education system needs support. And the ingenuity that's going on, that these businesses, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, and it's really great to see how these businesses are really fighting through this to get back to the point where we have to get back to work safe.
Dan?
So I'd like to take that question in two parts. One, as far as recovery and not having to go back to another shutdown, we need to have a strong investment in our healthcare system upstate. We talked about broadband already. This is another area where broadband will help our communities. With access to New York, broadband is good for our economy. It's also good for healthcare. And this underscores our need to go after this infrastructure upgrade as quickly as possible. And second, part of this question, as far as the long haul approach that we need to take to rebuild our economy, we do need to focus on our businesses that had to shut down to protect all of us. Now it's on us to protect them as they reopen so they can get back on track. But then the discussion will continue as far as how can we diversify our economy to going for that hasn't been here before without jeopardizing the things that we have. And that's where I think there are some pieces in place that we need to refocus on. And I've talked about this before through my campaign, as far as how we can incentivize an entrepreneurship in this district. Homegrown businesses create value and wealth for their communities. They also take care of their communities. And those are the ones I want to support the development of going forward. And we are in a unique position with the 5 colleges here, because each one stands in its own way and offers its own advantage to its students. With industry, new industry in this district, and that's something I want to go after. It's not an overnight success, but it does take time and nurturing, and I want to work on that.
And our next question is from the audience, from Hoodie Podolsky of Hartwick, New York. This is a question for both candidates. How would you evaluate the end of the school year with distance learning, and what are the implications in case we need to close schools in the fall? So we'll start with.
How do I evaluate the end of school learning and plans for the reopening? I'm not entirely sure the question is hard as that evaluate. If that's a question of what I think of it. We've talked about this on the school board. I think we're making the best of an otherwise very bad situation. This speaks to the amazing teachers that we have in a distance way. As far as evaluating student progress, that's incredibly difficult right now, and we may not be able to get a full of reopening. We obviously need to work on a few scenarios. The colleges are doing this. The SUNY campus has submitted their plans, the options that they have to reopen, and Harvard College is doing the same. all of our campuses need to think about how they will meet the community needs as they reopen. Each school is set in a different way, and so they have to come up with their own plan. The school districts also rely on guidance from the state education department, and to date, it's been lacking. And so we've been sort of trying to think of many options, knowing that the state may override it, like we've seen with the graduation requirement go from a small amount to 150, and we don't know what it's going to be like a week from now or 2 weeks. So I think our school administrators and our teachers are doing the best that they can considering the difficult situations. But we have to recognize that when we come back in the fall, our kids have been without many of the things that they need, that they usually get. And so we need to think about how we can catch up, if you will, for those students when we get back into the buildings. A third grader going to fourth grade is not going to be the same as a third or fourth grader a year ago. We have to be adaptable to this situation. And so far, the signs that I've seen indicate that our school teachers and our administrators are up to the job.
Thank you, Dan. Corey?
To echo what Dan just said about our teachers, man, what a crazy curveball, if you can even, that's probably minimizing it, that they received with all of this, and having to respond so quickly. And then talking to teachers about and having that very question, some would say that they, were really reluctant about digital and the things that are available to them, and this forced their hand, and they liked some things about it and others didn't. So I would say it was very variable, right? Whether or not teachers had success with it. But I haven't found a single teacher that has not told me how worried they are about certain students on an individual level that maybe they weren't getting responses with, and they were very worried about that, again, digital divide that we have. Another reason where it just highlighted how important access to broadband is. So with that variable, I would say as we get into the fall, we need to recognize this, and our administrators, I'm sure, are on this, and we need to be listening to those professionals about how we need to adapt if we see the scenario where we can't go back to school right away in the fall, and then give those teachers the tools that they can to be as successful as they can in reaching every single student that they can. It was very heartening. I had a conversation with a teacher that told me, Corey, I just want to go back, even if it's just for a day or two, just to know that my kids are all right. I mean, when you have that type of compassion, we need to find ways to do that digitally as we go forward.
Thank you, Corey. I just want to remind viewers that if you do have a question that you'd like to ask, send it to lwvcoop@gmail.com. lwvcoop@gmail.com. Okay, another question from our audience. This is from Kay Schimberg, initial K Schimberg. For both candidates, what is your position on gun control? How would you implement and enforce gun control efforts? We'll start with Corey.
Thank you very much for the question. So as a farmer and as a gun owner, I own, it's a tool on our farm. But more than that, it's a culture that we've had, right? I remember and still, with Thanksgivings every single year, it's part of our connection with nature. And my Uncle Phil, he's out there tonight. I don't remember when he's ever shot anything. It's been so long. It's his connection to nature. And again, it's tied with that. But that is very different with that gun culture that we have compared to that inner city district that I was working in Baltimore, in those neighborhoods. That gun culture, and you have to have in your head immediately when you're asked about gun control, those thoughts of Sandy Hook and what happened all the way back to Columbine. I remember vividly that day that happened in Columbine. So different, and we can have that, right? I don't need an AR-15, and I understand the want and that gun culture that we have in upstate in New York, but there is so much more to understand and the differences and be empathetic to somebody that's in the city and what that gun culture not only looks like, but also how just caustic that can be. And we have to be cognizant of that. And we have to be moving in that direction so that we're limiting gun violence. And we can still withhold things that we have in our family because you don't need those types of guns for the gun culture that I know can be very, very positive with.
Thank you, Corey. Dan?
It's a good question and a debate that is ongoing. And as far as how we enact gun control measures, it reminded me of a discussion I had with my mom a few years ago. We're responding and talking about a shooting that occurred. And in this case, we're actually speaking about Gabrielle Giffords and her shooting in 2011. And we're talking about those that were victimized by that shooting. And my mom said something pretty interesting to me that stuck with me. Because anytime we talk about control measures, we always hear this NRA don't own guns. What about their right to life and safety? How are we protecting those? And I think about the numbers we have. There are more guns in this country than there are people, but they're owned by less than half of us. It makes sense for us to ensure that those that choose to own guns are doing it safely. That's with background checks and red flag laws right now, both of which the incumbent has opposed. And I think is plainly wrong. This also goes against where the NRA tries to change the narrative to say that they don't want it, yet most NRA members want background checks. So as they say, pursuing common sense initiatives, common sense in this case is just following what the majority opinion wants, more background checks. Everyone should have a background check if you're buying a gun, plain and simple. Red flag laws, they also try to change the narrative on that as well, to say you're taking away guns from someone who doesn't have a record. It's a nonsense narrative that needs to go away. Because you know what? Red flag laws, most gun deaths are self-inflicted suicide. And red flag laws would help prevent those. So we need to go after those things that will protect our communities and look at it both ways. Those that could hurt themselves and others. And don't forget that there's both sides of it. So to Kathy's question, those are the kind of things we need to go after, where we do agree, yet we seem to have no traction to prevent gun sales to someone that would hurt themselves or others.
Thank you, Dan. Bob, do you have a question for our candidates?
Well, we've talked about the need for investment in broadband build out. We've talked about, it was Mr. Buttermann talked about incentives for businesses. And in his opening statement, Mr. Mosher talked about infrastructure investment. State government is a very expensive thing to run in the best of times, and these are not the best of times. The COVID pandemic has put extraordinary demands on state government, while the shutdown to combat it has had the effect of drying up so much of the tax revenue. So the question is, how do we make the money go around?
We're starting with Corey, I believe. Yep.
Oh, no,
Is it Dan?
Dan, I think it's you.
Dan, sorry. Sorry, Dan.
Yeah. So how do we make the money go around? This is accounting. If there's less money to work with, then we do have to have some difficult conversations as far as how we're going to get through this. To Steve's question earlier, as far as how we go through this recovery, the recovery economically is going to take time. The state budget is going to be damaged from this. So this speaks to the advocacy that we need in Albany to ensure we get our fair share. The fair share that I talked about before is dealing with some of the things that we don't want to lose sight of, like we talked about with green energy. That bill is still on the books to go after the infrastructure for energy generation. That is an economic driver as well as it's good for the environment. So we can't lose sight of those things. And as we go for those types of projects, that is in a way the fair share that we need to get, the money going around, the money in the projects that the state has set the vision to achieve. We want to make sure that we have a part of those projects. That's one area. The other area is in the economic development councils and some of the programs that have already been put in place. One that I'm very excited about is Startup New York, which started in 2014 to incentivize new business development without cannibalizing existing business. This is great for us because we have 5 colleges, more college per capita than anywhere else nearby. That's a good opportunity for us. And it doesn't necessarily take state money to make it work. So this is an opportunity for our colleges to work with the next generation of entrepreneurs and the business developers, set up shop upstate. To my view, it's generally a low-cost operation. It's about working with them within the school, the protection of the school, the curriculum that they have already developed for their students. So we don't want to win the game overnight. We're trying to play a strategic, long-term game approach that I think will work, but we just have to stick at it and have the right representation for it.
Thank you, Bob, for the question. So yeah, austerity is a reality, and we're going to have to work hard for the things that we're going to prioritize. With me, you know, education is really, really important, and we're going to need a fighter to fight for those things to make sure that austerity doesn't cut to the point where we can't get out of it. We talked about revenue generating too. It has to be part of the equation as we go through. But I want to talk about a third thing, and it's important for representatives and where they have expertise to understand where we can get the most bang for our buck and the value of a dollar. And there are things within agriculture that I've seen, man, that money spent in a certain way could have done so much more, generated so much more economic activity had it been spent in a certain way. And that's what I want to bring to the table. Those areas where, okay, yes, it's good you're spending that dollar in agriculture, but as a farmer, I can tell you where that's going to have more bang for its buck, and where it's going to help me diversify and get into markets that I don't have access to right now. Because agriculture is such a big generator of our economic activity in this state, those are the attentions we need as we go through this time to set us up to be prosperous down the road.
Thank you. Thank you. So we are getting close to the end of the evening. It's 8:13. So I'm going to have, I think, one more question. And that question is from Eric Newport of Lakeport. And his question is, what is your position on the New York Health Act? Do you support it? If so, what method of funding do you prefer? We'll start with Corey.
So the New York Health Act, I've been advised from 2 different ways about kind of movement along that. And I have not completely made up my mind. I'm going to defer a little bit because I want to understand it better about the economic impact. What I do know, for a long time, our Republican counterparts have argued, about private access to healthcare. Well, I think COVID has showed us what, that employee-based healthcare system, where the flaw is in that. And as an essential worker, I hope people can recognize where we are and the risks that are involved for healthcare for essential workers and workers with an employee-based healthcare. With 30 million people facing unemployment, that's really hard. So we need to be open-minded and looking at all avenues in healthcare so that we're successful. And this state has done such a good job prioritizing healthcare and making sure that its residents and citizens have healthcare. And I know everybody has a healthcare story. I have a healthcare story. I couldn't afford healthcare as a farmer, when I first started out. And the farm was doing their best, right? We were trying to find a way to help get us out of that scenario. And then the Health Care Act passed. All of a sudden, not only was that saving money for us because I could go on the exchange, but also our farms, our small businesses were benefiting from that change in healthcare. And we've seen that erode, right? Because we haven't had the leadership to really stand by the American people in healthcare. So that's what I'm focused in, and that's what I'm looking for the New York Health Act. And stay tuned because I'll have a yay or nay on that down the road.
Dan?
It's a discussion that has been around for a few years on the New York Health Act because it itself has been around a few years. And it has gone through the assembly, but it's gone nowhere. And I think there are some fatal flaws in that legislation that in order for it to be supported, it has to be corrected. There's a waiver provision in there for the federal government. That's not going to happen. So that's going to have to be fixed. It also requires or asks that the governor propose the funding solution for it. And that doesn't make any sense to me. I work in insurance. That's been my career. And this is a financing model to provide for healthcare. And when you talk about a financing model in insurance, you need to be accurate with the revenue that you're expecting, the premium, if you will, that you're going to charge for that healthcare. And if you get it wrong, the consequences could be very bad for our state. And so, plainly speaking, I don't think we're quite ready for that bill. There are other things we can do and that we must do to expand access and increase affordability for healthcare. We've talked about that. Broadband is one thing that would do it. We also need to create more access points for healthcare, like school-based clinics and clinics in association with pharmacies, so that your everyday, your routine needs can be addressed without having to go long distances or go to hospitals. By doing that, we can also decrease the cost of it and make it more affordable. And then finally, we also need to talk about the pricing of services. It doesn't make any sense that you go to the doctor, you have no idea what you're going to pay until you get this explanation of benefits a month later, and you're still confused by it. We need to stop playing games with pricing, and transparency and standardization legislation that says what you pay for this procedure or this expense, doctor's expense, is going to be the same wherever you go. And once we have that, then our providers can start planning better for their for their operations. Then they can start to invest in unique health needs for their community. And when we start doing those things, we'll see greater access and more affordability and people getting the care that they need.
Thank you, Dan. And so that's the end of our question and answer period. So I just want to quickly summarize what we've talked about. There's been quite a range of topics. So starting with climate change, a few questions on that, both in terms of local buy-in on green energy projects. Are you a better candidate than your opponent in the House? So questions about the response to the protests and police brutality, addressing division among constituents, talking with people who disagree with you, and a question about Bill McGee's success as a Democrat in this district and how to replicate that, broadband access, the question about making vote by mail permanent, unfunded mandates, recovering from COVID-19, and how the school year ended with distance learning and the prospect of whether schools will open in the fall, gun control, budget recovery, and then the New York Health Act is how we closed it out. So now what I'd like to do is ask the candidates to do their 2-minute closing statement. If you wish to do so, the order of the closing statements is the reverse of the opening statements. So we'll start with a closing statement from Corey Mosher.
Thank you, and I want to thank you, Leanne and Bob, so much for and all the people that are involved in this tonight. It's been a lot of fun, and I appreciate it. There are a lot of things that I could say to you in hopes to convince you to vote for me. So many ways that I could cleverly phrase this or that to try to let you know that I really mean what I'm saying. Instead of doing that, I'm gonna try something a little bit different. I'm gonna tell you a story about why and what has motivated me to run. Last year, working for Senator May, I had the opportunity and the privilege to walk around the state fair with our Senate legislators. And as we walked through, I got Rachel looked at me and asked, "Hey, Corey, come and let's." We're going to walk into the dairy building. Do you have some 4-H students? So I contacted really quick and, hey, yeah, can you come talk to the Senate Majority Leader? And in doing that, we walked in the barn, and as a lot of may know, you walk into the dairy barn, it's not uncommon to see a young child curled up next to a 1-ton animal. And that, of course, occurred right as we walked in. And the Senate Majority Leader turned wide-eyed and looked at me. And I could tell by her expression, she was looking for a clarification on what is this? What is going on? And in that moment, I saw such opportunity to communicate and talk. And in that moment, she was completely receptive and wanted to learn, and I was able to provide that opportunity. And it's why I think it's so critical to have that voice in our legislature. You know, if you want somebody who can represent you, who can get what you want done, then vote for me, a voice that will be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Dan?
Yeah, I also want to start by saying thanks to the league for making this happen. I think it worked. It was a success. It was a good discussion, good questions, and I really enjoyed the conversation we had. It's a conversation I want to keep going. My campaign is an inclusive one, trying to reach as many people as possible and have as many conversations as I can. I learn from every single one of them. And so please reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you and keep this conversation going. Of course, we didn't get to all of the issues tonight. We did cover quite a few, but if there's something you missed, I'd love to hear from you. You can go to my website, buttermanforassembly.com, and learn more about me there. You can also reach out to me through buttermanforassembly@gmail.com, or call me, or go on Facebook and find out more there. This process is just getting started, and I think what you've seen through my answers and through my discussion points is that although we're in troubling times, I am incredibly optimistic and excited about the future. And I want to get right to work for you so that we're not left behind and that we can grab those opportunities right before us. They're right there. We just need someone to go after it. So please go and vote in the primary. There's 3 ways this year, with the early voting, the absentee voting, and on June 23rd. I'm asking for your vote. Go vote, cast your ballot, and make your voice heard and make it count. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the candidates, Corey Mosher and Dan Buttermann, to Daily Star Managing Editor Robert Cairns, my fellow league members working furiously behind the scenes, and to the audience for making this a valuable, informative, and engaging event. And I'm going to share one more time the information. Let's see. Again, just the voting information. We do, if you go to vote411.org, we have information about the specific elections that would be on your ballot. And then we also have, if you go to lwvny.org, you'll find the information that you see here as well. So we strongly recommend that you do that. And then the last thing that I'd like to do is just, this is the information for reaching your candidates here as well as the league. If you wish to contact any of us, here's how to reach us. And we want to thank you very much and wish you a good night. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.